All right. Well, welcome everyone, and to viewers at home. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing time. Thank you for joining our celebration of Juneteenth. As many of you know, we have actually been celebrating Juneteenth, if not all year, definitely the entire month of June. So hopefully by now you have had a chance to visit the beautiful gallery where you can see the exhibition of Melanin, which has been led by Letitia Forney-Rush and Mariah Bisqueta. We are so proud of everything that they have offered. We are also proud of the families of Black artists who have offered so many beautiful things. So if you are, and I should say all of us should be invested in Black futures and Black art, I hope that you get a chance to visit before the gallery space closes at the end of the month. That conversation really was around us understanding that, especially for Juneteenth, where we're trying to vision what is needed for Black liberation, we know that artists are a part of creating ideas of what is possible. And so here we are today having a discussion with people whom we trust about what it means to celebrate Juneteenth now, after the year that we have all lived through, survived, perhaps persisted through in the midst of many pandemics, right? So whether that was COVID, which disrupted so many of our families, gentrification, which continued to displace so many of our families, and then a continuation of the same dehumanization of Black people, right? Or even in some ways, this oversharing of Black people in incredibly, incredibly painful moments. So we're gathering today with the intention of what work still needs to be done, who are the people that we trust, the communities that we need to build to really see Juneteenth and build that out for the liberation that really Black folks are still mobilizing and organizing for. So just so you have an idea of what to expect today, before we get into our panel discussion, we will have some community agreements. And we wanted to make sure we shared those with you because we don't want to suggest that you just go to whatever coffee table and start having a discussion with whoever. That would not be healthy. So we want to share with you how we think of community agreements and what those mean to us. Then we'll actually do an opening round so you can hear everyone's voices and what brings them to this conversation. We'll share a little bit about our grounding. So who are some figures and history that we want to make sure we include when thinking about Black liberation, specifically in Santa Barbara. We'll share our land acknowledgement because we understand that Black liberation cannot happen outside of supporting our Indigenous siblings in organizing for solidarity, but also in reclaiming their land. And then we'll have a conversation on how each of us show up in this work and how we support our partners. So as you'll see in our conversation, we'll invite Black folks to really speak first on their experiences, desires, and wishes. And then we'll ask our non-Black allies to share how might they support us in that, what might be reflections, what might be activated in them when talking about these different things, so that you at home can also think of how you show up for Black people in your community. Or if you're someone who also identifies as Black, hopefully perhaps there's a little less work on you because now you're hearing from allies how they can show up for you, right? So hopefully you find this conversation meaningful and a continuation of Juneteenth all month long. So I will start first with our community agreements. And I would say that community agreements isn't a concept that any of us have created, although it would be cool if we were just the brilliant minds that thought of all these wonderful things. But this is actually something that we really, really owe to folks with disabilities, to folks who have talked about restoring peace and community after harm and saying, what are the things that we need to be in community with each other? What are the things that we need to show up meaningfully in this conversation? So these are some of the suggestions that we have for each other. But as you have these conversations, I hope that you ask people who you're engaging with, what do you need to have this conversation with me? So the suggestions that we have here are that we'll be mindful of our space. So we're going to take space and make space. So if we're talking a whole bunch, we want to make sure that we're making room for other people to communicate in different ways. So that could be if someone would rather type their comment in the chat. That could be if maybe we're allowing for there to be quiet times, so that people who perhaps need more time to process can still chime in and not feel rushed. We also want to say that it's okay to take care of ourselves. So many of us have kids, many of us need to use a restroom, many of us need to just move around and use our bodies. We want to say that all of that is okay. The other thing that we've agreed to do is that we'll critique the idea, not the person. So this really comes from being in relationship with people, but we want to say that if we're holding each other with love, we want to be honest about when we disagree or when we want someone to do a little bit more work, but that doesn't mean that we're making a judgment on the entire person, right? Because we know that oftentimes if we're operating in like binary, someone is either just good or just bad, but that's not how we are as humans, right? We can make mistakes, but we need people to call us and let us know when we're being asked to do better and we're being asked to think deeper. The other thing that we'll do is respect folks' full identities. So those of us that feel comfortable have made a decision to share our pronouns on the screen. We can restate those later, but we want to make sure, again, in creating space, that we're not requiring folks to only show up with bits and pieces of themselves, which would be causing harm. And so we would ask, as you have these conversations too, that you're committed to honoring that person's full identities. The other agreement is centering the most impacted. So we know when we're having conversations about Juneteenth, that is most definitely Black people. But even within that, it would be the most marginalized of marginalized Black people. So that would mean as we're talking about Black liberation, we can't forget talking about Black mothering, we can't forget Black children, we can't forget Black folks who are also LGBTQIA+, we can't forget Black folks who are undocumented. Because if we are just getting liberation for one of those groups, one, I would say that that's not real safety, but also it's not for the entire community. So we haven't really set out what we had hoped to do. The other thing we'll do is hold folks accountable if we cause harm. So hopefully that won't happen today. We usually call it sharing glitter and not shade. But if that does happen, again, we want to be honest about what's needed for restoration and also apologize if we say something that's harmful. So I'll open it up now to the panelists. Is there anything else that you all would like to add to our community agreements as we get into today's discussion? Okay, so thank you for that affirmation. I'm thinking now what we can do is actually do an opening round. So to people who are viewing at home, I shared with folks, just share the titles, the things that you do that feel most important to you. So you might see someone and you already know that they do like 20 things. You might not hear all those 20 things today, and that's okay, right? We ask folks to just share their identities or titles that they feel are really important to them. In this work and in this moment. And for you at home too, also know that you don't need to have a long resume or a list of all the different things that you've done and all the places you've been educated to care about and be a part of Black liberation. So I will just open the floor to whoever wants to go first, and I will mute myself for you all to introduce each other.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chiani, and I'm a mother of three. I'm an organizer and activist and co-founder of Juneteenth Santa Barbara.
I'll jump in. I am Warren Ritter, a community member, but definitely in the spirit of Juneteenth. I come as a son and as a grandson. I'm already getting emotional, but just thinking about all the people that have sacrificed for me to be in the place where I'm at, I want to honor them. So, son and the grandson today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna, and I am a community member and supporter of our friends in this room and building a community that is safe for all of us. I think the identity that's most salient right now is I am a new tia again. My brother and his girlfriend just had a baby, and it's a good reminder about why I am invested in liberation of our most marginalized folks, because I want those kids to grow up in a place that's safer and welcoming of everyone and who they are and how they navigate this world. So.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chelsea Lancaster. My pronouns are she, her, aya. I'm a mother. I am a community member and organizer, and I am a friend and co-conspirator with the folks in this room. Thank you for inviting me to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Athena Tan, pronouns she or they. I am Chinese Filipino. I am very honored to be here sharing space with folks that I have learned so much from about holding space and community accountability.
Well, thank you, everyone. Excited to be a part of this conversation as well. I'm Simone. My pronouns are she, her, hers. One of the founders of Healing Justice Santa Barbara, also one of the co-founders of Juneteenth Santa Barbara with Chiani and Jordan, who's not here. I was thinking, I was like, I should have had a little like cutout of his face to be like, and Jordan. But to think about where we started as having like a intimate cookout at El Centro, actually, with all of us cooking food and our kids everywhere. I had just given birth to Zora like a month before, which now I'm like, why did I agree to do that? But the things that we do. And then thinking about how we grew from that to then, you know, a celebration that we hosted at the library where more than 400 people came, to then the pivot in the midst of COVID where Jordan and I were like editing videos for a digital archive of Black folks, up to the day of Juneteenth. I don't want to brag about that because that was stressful, but where we got over 15,000 hits to that website. That was amazing. That was amazing. And if we think about who those 15,000 people were, and just knowing the demographics of Santa Barbara, we know that was some non-Black folks, right? Like, yes, we want to celebrate. I knew I personally was like, let me visit this page like 5 times because this is important. But I appreciate all of the other people, right? All the other non-Black folks who took the time to watch, you know, spoken word and poetry. We had young folks who dressed up as different Black icons and told those stories. Elders who talked about what it was like to have built their homes in Santa Barbara, and so now have their grandchildren living in those homes and adding to this really rich culture. So with all of that, super excited to be with you all today. So like I mentioned before we share the story of Jerry Forney, we wanted to start with our land acknowledgement, and then we'll share some of the feedback that we received from different elders in our community. So I'm just going to pull up on my screen the land acknowledgement that we prepared as Healing Justice. Before getting into this too, I'm just thinking what really prompted us to do this was actually letters that we had written in support of our Chumash siblings and really pushing for the renaming of Indio Muerto Street. And that really, I don't want to say forced us, but pushed us to make sure we put in writing our commitment to our Indigenous siblings, and that commitment was deeper than just a statement. Because I think so many organizations, we're not going to say names, have land acknowledgements now, but it's not clear what that actually means and how that shows up and what risks they're willing to take in support of our Indigenous siblings. So this is part of the longer letter that we shared a few different times in support of our Indigenous siblings. So this one is, it reads, we Healing Justice Santa Barbara would like to acknowledge the traditional and ancestral unceded territory of the Chumash on which we were organizing today. As a Black-led and centered group, we deeply understand the ways that capitalism has succeeded by exploiting the labor of Black bodies. So too have these harmful systems benefited from obscuring the existence of Indigenous people, because by doing so, those aligned with colonialism can feel less conflicted about laying claim to land and resources which are not theirs. Our words and actions matter. It is not enough to point to public statements that repeat the values of diversity and inclusion. Instead, we must interrogate and actively respond to our own complicity in the oppression of others. Our communities are deserving of more. And so, as a collective of stolen people organizing on stolen land, we fully support our Chumash siblings in pushing for Indigenous reparations and sovereignty. So with that, we did want to share, I think, part of, oh, now my child's talking about Play-Doh. But I did want to share in part of supporting people to show up in different ways. Hold on, honey. Okay, maybe Zora's going to be in the video. We'll just make that work. And part of making ways for people to show up in different ways is thinking about how do we allow people to participate who may not be able to join this conversation? Because just because someone's able to make this date does not mean that they're any less invested. And so one of those people who we hold in high esteem, but we want to make sure that we included, was actually Marcus Sr. And they prepared this really, really beautiful letter. We're not able to share that all today, but something they shared, and I don't want to call it from an Indigenous perspective, because I think perspective sometimes suggests that, oh, well, we're going to see this differently, as opposed to truth. And so something he shared, one of his truths, was that in thinking about Juneteenth and what it means for him, is that it also mirrors a legacy of broken treaties and broken promises that the United States, and not even just the United States, but different countries, especially in North America, have treated Black and Indigenous groups. And so if we think about these legacies of sometimes using law, using words to create, whether it's borders, to create concepts of ownership, but then also to disenfranchise people, Juneteenth in many ways, especially for folks who may not know or who may be just now are becoming exposed to Juneteenth. It might be confusing because you're like, why are you celebrating Juneteenth? Wasn't people free 2 years before? Yes, but it's also important that we understand that many states did not acknowledge the Emancipation Proclamation. And so it wasn't until General Granger arranged to enforce the proclamation. So there was all this legal code saying, okay, these folks should be free. People were still enslaved. And so what was happening was enslaved Black folks probably heard, right, of relatives, of other people in different areas, because we know how Black folks be talking, but especially then to share the truth of what was happening, that other folks were free, that kin were free, right? But their particular, I don't know, in specific states, including Texas, but there were several who were refusing to honor the Emancipation Proclamation. White folks, especially slave-owning white folks, continued on as if they should still be entitled to Black folks' bodies. And there's a much longer conversation on, well, if a legal document says you're free, and now that there's this military person saying that you're free, are you actually free? And that's what we do traditionally on Juneteenth. So talk about what more needs to happen, because we know that even after Juneteenth, that Black folks then were met with violent segregation, Jim Crow, violent Reconstruction. We can even talk about how that looks now in 2021. So are Black people now fully able to exercise all of the rights of citizenship, right? So hopefully that's something we can talk about today. But I wanted to just make sure again that we were making space for people to participate, even if they weren't able to be here. So we thank Marcus Sr. for sharing that beautiful reflection with us. With his permission, I'm like, I just want to share the whole letter because it was so wonderfully prepared. And he referenced many different books that people can look into and read should they wish to deepen their understanding. So perhaps we can make that available to people on our website for people to do more learning about what it looks like to support Juneteenth, but also what are these Indigenous truths that we need to make sure that we engage with in really, really meaningful ways. So with that grounding, so sharing that, one of the other stories that we really, really wanted to start with, there's two in particular, but we'll start with one, and it actually has to do with a ancestor of one of the people in our collective. So I mentioned in the beginning, we love Letitia. She has been leading this really beautiful exhibition on State Street called Melanin, but some of you may not know that Letitia and her family have been here for generations. And one of those generations is Jerry, or Jeremiah Forney, who is actually recorded as the first Black person in Santa Barbara. We wanted to start with his story, one, to remind viewers that Black people have been here. So when we hear questions like, where are the Black people? We've been here. But not only that, we have established since we arrived here, legacies of organizing. And I'm just going to say legacies of mothering too, because we're going to see my child's head everywhere in this. So we will share different articles where you can learn about Jerry Forney, but I think what's really important for you all to hear from us today, what we'll talk about, was that we often think of California as not being touched by enslavement, and that is a myth. That is not true. So Jerry Forney was actually forcibly brought to California by, and I'm going to say a white slave owner, but someone who was under the impression that they could actually own this Black person. So he was forced to California as actually a part of gold mining. And so eventually what happened was the folks that owned him tried to return home to the Carolinas and did so, and then sent letter like, okay, we're ready for you to come back now that you've done all this mining, made us this money. And Jerry was like, yeah, no, I'm not coming. Now, there's a lot that I can see into this. It's one of these unfortunate things where, because people at that time, and I should be very specific, white folks at that time did not think it was worthy of documentation. We don't have the full story of what happened when he said this. We don't have the full story of what then caused him to have to move up and down the coast to all of these different cities after refusing to return home. But because we know history, we know that perhaps there was violence. We know that perhaps this man was threatened. But we also know that once Jerry Forney declared his freedom and moved up and down the coast, every time he moved, this man registered to vote. And that's actually how we were able to track him, and something that was super important to his descendants like Letitia. Because if you think about it, we know that even those who were enslaved knew that they were people, right? And so for this man to say, not only am I free, I'm gonna exercise all the damn rights that y'all folks have, even when you try to push me into different cities. And so every city, this man made sure that he wrote down his name and exercised this right? Or attempted to, which is something that Letitia's family is super, super proud of. The other thing we know is that because of discrimination, he often wasn't able to use his full gifts and talents. And so what often happened was he was taking on, I don't want to say menial because these jobs are important, and I don't want to diminish the labor that Jerry Forney was involved in. But at some points we know that he was hired in like a moving circus. We know that at other points he shined shoes. And I guess in other words, like a more broad term might be in like entertainment, right? We do know what happened when he came to Santa Barbara. And this is something that I shared to folks on this call too, is that in documenting who this man was, some of the first articles we see about Jerry Forney when he gets to Santa Barbara was that he was invited to be in this parade to celebrate the centennial of Santa Barbara, but he was asked to play the role of an enslaved person from Uncle Tom's Cabin. And they made this big show of it where he was supposed to have chains on and then lift his arms and not have the chains on. But if you can imagine what this is like for a man who not only knew he was worthy of freedom, but then claimed it for himself, registered to vote, moved to all of these different cities, and then he's asked to be in a parade for white folks who also at that time were only allowing him to live in certain parts of the city. So we know that Jerry Forney settled on the east side. What often is not covered in history and articles is that that was the area that Black people were allowed to live because of restrictive covenants and redlining. So they didn't just happen to be on the east side. That was the only place that they were allowed to be. What I want to end on is that Jerry Forney, despite all of these different systemic and very violent illustrations of white supremacy, was determined to make his home in Santa Barbara. And so not only did he marry Martha and create community and establish a business, a shoe shine business, he also sent word to other Black folks who were still in the Carolinas that they could come to Santa Barbara and make a home. And so he led this petition. It was supported by many business owners to say, we need folks who are willing to work here. I would like to have 500 more Black folks come to Santa Barbara. And he collected signatures. Now, this is the really important part that people know this, that Jerry Forney and Martha did not have biological children. But what did happen was they took in a whole bunch of kids and kin, which again was common at that time for Black folks, because you took in children and cousins and nephews and nieces, especially in the midst of enslavement where families were forcibly separated, and raised them as your own. And so we know that one of those families that was raised as his own was Letitia's bloodline. So they were people who were told about, there is this man, Jerry Forney, who is looking for us and is welcoming us to make a home here. And so it's really beautiful, and Letitia's family is super proud because they found a home with Jerry Forney, right? They carry that last name, and they are proud to continue that. So what are the legacies of Black people expanding our families, creating space for cousins, maybe folks we don't even know, just Black people who we want to make sure that they are safe and cared for? And how does that look when we're thinking about continuing liberation? So that was a story that Letitia and I wanted to make sure we shared today, because it's important that our viewers know that. But now I'm going to be quiet and actually share the floor with other Black folks to talk about what this might mean to them. And then after that, we can transition to some of our allies. So I'm going to put myself on mute for you all to kind of jump in.
Yeah, I guess thanks for sharing all of that. I had read about it, but it's different hearing it and just sort of visualizing all of the different pieces of that history. And I think the first thing that really stood out to me after listening to you talk, Simone, is just really thinking and imagining and reimagining what community looks like, what family looks like, right? Black communities have always, our families have looked different and have always sort of been outside of what we think of family here in the US. Like this really individualistic idea of what family looks like here is so much more expanded in a lot of Black communities. And I think that that's a really beautiful piece of that, because he collected, names on a petition to bring 500 Black folks out. And for me, like, I don't know him, but I'm imagining he's like, these are going to be my family. These are going to be the people I bring here. Like, we're going to create something together. It makes me think about other places too across California that's been the case, where Black folks wanted to create community and wanted to bring other Black folks together to create these big sort of familial spaces where we're able to be free in the ways that we're able to be free in those moments and those pieces of history. So I think for me, like, especially as a mother, I think about what does freedom look like within community and within family structures, and like listening to that, I'm just like, oh, like this is an amazing human being who had this vision. He had a vision and he found ways to make that vision come to life. And I think that that's really notable and beautiful, and we can learn from that. I think, it's like we can sort of break away at the pieces of what we've learned over time about what family looks like to expand that for ourselves as we envision liberation for ourselves and our communities. And then I think about the voting thing too, like how amazing is it to have had that like that personal power to be like, no, I'm going to register to vote everywhere I go, because people are going to know that I'm going to vote. And I'm going to show up, and I'm a person who deserves and is willing or is worthy of being in these spaces, of having this decision-making power. I think that's really important too, because I feel like sometimes people forget the different ways in which we engage in resistance. And like, I'm hearing that and I'm thinking, this is someone engaging in resistance. Like, this is his resistance. And maybe that was the only way that he could engage in resistance at that time. And it was a powerful way, especially when so many Black folks were not able to vote anywhere in the United States, So, for me, I'm also thinking about, what does resistance mean in the context of liberation? And like, what are the different ways that we engage in that every single day? And they may not be the big displays of resistance that we think of when we think about what does resistance look like, but it happens in small moments and in small ways as well, right? And those are very powerful ways to engage in that. So those are some of the things that came up for me when I was listening to you, Simone, just thinking about like, what do we learn from that? What can we take from that? And I know for me personally, it's like, I don't always have to be at the front line of a movement to make a difference or to be in resistance or to create different forms of liberation and structure of family for myself and others. I can do that in so many different ways. And I think it just shows the expansiveness of what it means to be in community together.
Wow. Now, yes, and yes. It's funny, in my notes, I wrote down resilience/perseverance, because I mean that's what it is. This story, so it resonates on so many levels for me, because I'm originally from South Carolina, and I've only been in Santa Barbara for about 6 years, and so I think a lot of times, especially people who are born and raised in California, I don't think sometimes they understand the breadth and the depth of how much slavery has impacted us and still impacts us. I mean, this is crazy to even say, but like my grandfather is in his 80s and he still has marks on his back from when people abused him. He's in his 80s. So it's not like it's something that's super far-fetched. So when I hear this story, you think about this: a man that came from the Carolinas came over to California. Maybe in his mind, he thought that, it was going to be better. He comes here and is still impacted by the same bigotry, the same kinds of, we don't want you around, oh, this is your designated area. But for this man to really continue to push his way despite all that, I mean, for me, it's inspiring. It's inspiring to know that we're not being, some of us are being persecuted to that extent, but we're not on the threat of every day we might die. We're not on the threat of, I got to be careful where I'm going because someone might be trying to take me back to this other place. And so for me, it gives me like an added strength almost. So like this is the work that we're doing. And if this man could go to those lengths and those extremes to make sure that he was still fighting his fight, it just makes me feel better about the stuff that we're trying to do here in Santa Barbara at this day and age. Fighting to have a cultural resource center. You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things, to me, embodies all of what he's tried to do. You know what I mean? Let's create a space for us. He was, and we think about that circus thing when he was asked to perform on the parade, excuse me. I mean, just to think about asking a man, even if they didn't force him to do it, asking a man to enact his own personal trauma. I mean, just to think about that, like, yeah, you might try to make it this like, oh, you're free type thing, but like this man literally was in chains at one point in time. This man literally was forced to do some truly degrading things. And it's like, to ask a person to go through that again and again, and I just think it's so insensitive. And I think that speaks to what we go through today in Santa Barbara. A lot of times we are forced to relive our traumas. We're asked all these questions in spaces. What can I do to help? Or tell me your story. And it's like, it's those things that even in today's time where it gets hard. And so for me, I am very thankful for allies. I'm thankful for people who help share that workload, because it definitely helps us as Black folks know that we have people that we can go to, that we can talk to, that are going to be there to give us that pat on the back, that can sit with us, and that can understand that sometimes it's okay not to ask questions. It's okay to listen. It's okay not to want to take up the space. And so, I just think about Jerry and what he's done. It's just very inspiring. Like I said, I'm here as a son and a grandson because of what our ancestors have done. So I am just truly thankful and appreciative of what he's done for us.
Yeah, and I think listening to you too, I'm reminded of so there's this perception that I think you sort of brought up about, I think people think of California as like I really do think people think if they come to California, it's not going to be as racist, right? Or like there's this perception out there. Okay, we all live here, so we know what it's like. But I think that I'm thinking back to Jerry and his experience, and not that I don't think he came here thinking that it was less racist. He probably, maybe like you said, Warren, that it was better, right? He thought it'd be a better sort of situation, and it wasn't. And to me, like, I'm thinking about this in the context of that historical period, and then looking at that, at what it looks like today. And it's the same thing, right? It's like folks think that California does, like, that we don't experience racism here, but it is experienced. It's just in a different way, and it's just as damaging as it is anywhere else. And I think that people don't always understand how just insidious the racism is and how impactful it is and harmful. Like that story of Jerry being forced to recreate that trauma, right? Like thinking about what white folks say a lot of the time about racism in California is that, oh, but we were nice to Black folks, and we let them live in our city, right? We gave them a place to live in our city. Like, these are the actual justifications that white folks provide when we push back, you know? And I think about that in this story, wondering what white folks were saying to themselves about some of these incidents, like that parade, you know, incident where he was having to, you know, act as an enslaved person. And just thinking about what white folks said to themselves about designating certain areas of a city for just Black people. And I hear it today too, like, but, you know, white folks we let Black people live here, like as if it was up to them to provide permission for Black folks to live and exist and breathe. So, you know, like, those are some of the things that came up for me when I was listening to you. I was just thinking about, like, these people keep telling us that they're nice to us, and I'm hearing all this history and I'm still seeing it today. Like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And honestly, they don't even mask it that well. You know, I almost wanted to say right there, it's the same thing, but it looks different. But actually, it doesn't really look that different, right? It doesn't. So I don't mean to laugh. It's really not funny, but I'm just sort of like thinking about how ridiculous. I think it's laughter for me because it just feels so silly, ridiculous. Like, the justifications are so transparent to me that I feel like, you know, we really have to acknowledge and name that, you know, these things aren't normal and they're not okay, and they continue to happen all the time, every day. So with that, I'll pass it back to Warren if you want to say something, or any other folks here who have something coming up for them too.
I think if we want to open it up to the rest of the group, you know, my last little point on that is, like, if people really cared, it would show. You know, the fact that the ancestral place where this historical figure is now a parking lot in the funk zone is kind of like, that tells me all I need to know right there. Like, did you really care about the history of this people? And it's like, no, like my grandmother says, the proof is in the pudding, and clearly it's not there. So, you know, as we open up the floor, that's my piece.
Yeah, and I'll just, sorry, and I know we're like opening the floor, but I'm like, I still have something to say. But, you know, yes, the proof is in the pudding, and our histories are disposable. Like, not to me, not to us, but historically speaking, when we think about how is our history documented, right? Simone, you touched on the documentation or lack thereof. Like, our histories have always felt disposable. Like, white folks have disposed of our histories in so many ways. We can't even trace back where we come from. So, you know, I think it's like, you know, it's like, I don't know, I just think about the parking lot, right? And that's a historical place right now for so many, and yet it's been disposed of. That history has been disposed of, and we have to really think about what that means.
I have my brain this is such a beautiful dialogue. I'm just really overwhelmed with everything everybody's saying. Reading Jerry Forney's story again, reframed and written by Black women and his ancestor. The words, you know, liberation, seeking safety, right? That displacement really stuck out to me. And hearing the story about him having to perform in that way in the parade, and thinking about Santa Barbara, and thinking about our annual celebration of colonialism as we think about the connections and the intersections of chattel slavery and genocide, right? And how that is a celebration, again, of colonialism, of genocide. It features a bunch of white folks dressing up like brown folks, acting like they give a fuck about brown folks when we know they don't, right? They love the culture, they don't love the people. So that's really sitting with me, right? Because that's next month. I'm sorry, that's in August, right? So as we sit in the context of Juneteenth and this really beautiful liberatory dialogue, I keep thinking about that. I'm also really thinking about sitting in the context of pride. And Simone, you really framing, the conversation, like if Black trans folks are not, the life expectancy of a Black trans person is 35 years, and all these folks out here waving their rainbow flags, but don't remember that Pride started as a police riot led by Black and brown trans folks, trans women. And so, how much like capitalism and colonialism, how much we erase the significance even of the things that we celebrate. And thinking about the context of Juneteenth and having this fear of like white folks and all these other folks co-opting this celebration for and by Black people and commercializing it for profit. And erasing its meaning, like that's something I really sit with, that like as a co-conspirator, as a white presenting person, that's my job to fight that, right? When I show up, that's my job to really interrogate that. And then the last thing I'm going to say, I'm thinking about Bruce's Beach, Chiani, when we think about space, right? And reclaiming space that was stolen. My last thing when we're talking about California, I really go back, Simone, to that sister that showed up from BLM LA, who was originally from the South. She's a Black Indigenous woman organizer, and she really thought about coming to California from the South and how she would encounter white folks in California and they'd be like, "Ooh, you're from the South, it's so bad there." And she's like, and what white folks, especially in California, don't understand is that just because we have these progressive ideals that live in our brains, that we are not also participating in white supremacy, that we are not upholding white supremacy. So the work that we're trying to do, which she framed it as real solidarity, it's putting your body on the line. It's putting, everything on the line, right? For Black liberation and collective liberation. And I want to recommend to everybody, like, if you're not reading this book is like something I just sit with every single day. And it's really easy to take in because they're short stories, right? But there's one about like that we can't do this work alone, right? So when I think about this room full of incredible folks and all the other people in our network, that we do this work together, and we do it until everybody's free. So thank you.
And when you go buy that book, buy it from a Black-owned bookshop, not Amazon. Which kind of, again, yeah, the brilliance that has already been shared, I think always leaves me awestruck anyway. The way that Simone spoke the history of Jerry Forney was just really touching in a way that, like, reading it, you read it, you get it, but when someone's speaking, what you're reading, it just lands in a different way. And one of the things that is resonating with me about this conversation is something that Chiani said about what resistance looks like and what engaging in it looks like. And I think as an ally and accomplice and co-conspirator, it's really important for us to sit with that and to understand that the expectation isn't that we're going to be out here leading movements, right? Some of us have that gift and talent and use that. And a lot of us don't have that gift and talent. And that's okay. We have other gifts and talents that contribute to the disruption and the resistance to white supremacy, right? And I see myself as someone who is more of a behind the scenes kind of person. And I just want to uplift that, to empower you all to engage in those ways. It really makes me think about, even like what I just said, where you're using your dollars, that matters. It's disrupting capitalism, right? I think a lot about something from Jerry's story that really resonated with me about how he mentored people who came here and Black people who came here and helped them establish their businesses, right? That's disruption. Helping Black people succeed in a capitalistic space where they can be autonomous and really take ownership of their lives and their future is disrupting these systems. Thinking about how, we support our cultural resource center here in town. Recently, there was some decisions made at the city council meeting. It's important that we all stay engaged in that and hold our elected officials accountable for that, right? They need to know who the community is. That's us. We are part of that. You don't have to do a public comment. You can write an email. You can share the story with the community. Don't be limited by thinking, oh, I can't stand in front of 1,000 people and speak eloquently to all of these things. That's not for everyone. And it's okay. Saying something in a meeting where your colleague is experiencing anti-Blackness, that freaking matters. When, people are speaking poorly of people who are not present. In this moment, we're talking about Black folks and Juneteenth, but it comes up, across all marginalized identities. Stand up for those people when people think they're in a safe space. And I'm particularly talking to you white people, because I know that's happening in spaces that you're occupying. How are you holding your family and friends accountable? That matters. It's hard, it's painful, it's challenging to have to sit with the reality of what our friends and family actually participate in and working with them to dismantle that, right? And understanding that our silence is violence, essentially. So just encouraging everyone to do or say something, anything, and that will help you build confidence to continue to practice that. Also, understanding that you will make a mistake and that it will likely cause harm, and that the goal should be to listen to the people that you've harmed, genuinely apologize for that harm, and do better. Don't be paralyzed. Sorry, that's ableist language. Don't be frozen in that moment and allow that to prevent you from continuing the work. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and the goal is to do better next time and take accountability for when that happens. So, and also, in case anybody was wondering, Chelsea was talking about Fiesta. She didn't say it, but we need to say it. Fiesta, she's talking about Fiesta.
My bad.
I'm glad I get to go after Anna, because I feel like a bunch of the things that have been churning in my head as you all have spoken are really continuing from the things that you brought up. As I was listening to Simone so powerfully retell the story of Jerry Forney, that phrase, "we keep us safe," that's become pretty popular, among folks who are connected to organizing and activism, kept going through my head. As one of the core principles, right, that was guiding the way that Jerry Forney was growing and cultivating family in this other place that felt safer in certain ways. It offered like at least some different semblance of freedom at the time. And I wanted to, in the space, connect that to what's been going on with Asian Americans over the past year, because we've been put in this position where we felt more physically threatened and at risk of physical harm. And there's been some, two easy parallels being drawn between Asian Americans and Black Americans because of that, that are, you know, in some cases actually causing more harm, and in other ways, like maybe more implicitly fueling harmful systems. And the scholar, the Black Studies scholar, Frank Wilderson, who identifies as an Afro-pessimist, says something like, just because we share the same social experiences doesn't mean we occupy the same structural position. And you see in a lot of, I don't know, like Instagram graphics, you could say popular discourse about stopping Asian American hate, all these parallels that are being drawn, like, oh, we're just on opposite sides of the model minority triangle, so we're like basically kind of the same. Or like, oh, Asian Americans are the victims of hate crime, so we kind of know what it's like to be Black. And it's like, no, because we don't share the same systemic position, and our bodies haven't been exploited in the same way throughout history. Yeah, there have been times when like Asian Americans too have been redlined, have had their land stolen from them, their labor stolen from them. But in many ways, those practices were done because they were enacted at a much bigger scale on Black people first. And they were like, oh, this is a really, you know, effective way of subjugating people for generations. So when we think about We Keep Us Safe, I just, you know, speaking to the audience and especially Asian Americans, like I think people too often think of that as like, when we're keeping us safe, we can feel comfortable doing that. But when we occupy different structural positions, looking out for everybody and for collective safety, Asians are probably not going to feel comfortable doing that, just like white people shouldn't feel comfortable. And this is where I'm thinking about what Anna was saying, that I think I personally, and you know, I'm a background person too, but I tend to think like, if I'm feeling too comfortable, then somebody else's comfort who doesn't have the same structural privileges is probably being sacrificed for mine. And so keeping that sense of the bigger picture is really important. And like specifically, you know, we're talking about Asian celebrities posting mugshots of Black people because they attacked an Asian person as though the fact of Blackness was the problem, and playing into this idea of like a crime wave against Asian people. And I'm taking this criticism from the Asian American scholar Tamara Nopper, who writes and teaches a lot in abolition. And the idea of a crime wave is just gonna fuel all this hate crime legislation and additional policing. And who is that ultimately gonna land on? Not only those people who are already really vulnerable to state violence, but it's not gonna protect those Asians who are themselves vulnerable to state violence, who may be houseless, you know, who are poor immigrants, low-wage workers. So there's, I think too often non-Black people of color think like, oh, phew, well, I'm not white. Like we have all these shared histories of solidarity that we can talk about. So like we're cool, but you got to look more carefully into that.
That's amazing. And it's really funny because one thing I think everyone, if you have never researched Afro-pessimism and actually like watched and read some of the work that Dr. Wilderson is doing on that topic, I mean, Afro-pessimism and critical race theory, I mean, those are two things that are really looking at where our problems lie as far as like the law and how people like interact in those things. totally recommend that. So thank you, Athena, for bringing that up, because those are some really, really interesting topics. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and it's just a real brief one and not funny, but when Anna was talking about mistakes and falling short and doing things right the next time, I just have to name, since we're naming stuff, the articles that have been written on Jerry, like the links to in the Independent. It's just like, on one hand, I don't want to say like, I don't want to make it like a bad thing, because I'm glad that there's some work being done and something being, like, okay, it's being shared. But on the same token, it's like, if you're going to do it right. You know what I mean? Like, try and contact some folks that actually have ties, do some research, talk to some of our Black, because I can 90% guarantee they didn't try to reach out to some of our people that would probably know these stories. Names like Sojourner automatically pop up to mind. Like, it was true. I'm sure they didn't reach out to her. So it's just like, if you're going to do that, do it right. Do it all the way. Don't half do it. Like, to me, that's like all encompassing about this allyship thing we're talking about. It's just like, if you're going to try and be an ally, do it the right way. And if you don't think you're going to take it all the way to 100%, don't do it. Leave it for someone else, or give that information to someone else who is willing to do that. So when you were saying that, Anna, that just kind of sparked that, because hearing the real story, or we don't even have the real story, like Simone was saying, like, there's so much that was not documented, so we don't actually know the full amount. We can't even like go to the house and try to see if there are records or paperwork, because it doesn't exist. And so thinking about all of that, and how it's just like this cascading effect of like, we're trying to get back, and we want allies to be with us on this journey. But if you're going to be an ally, be a real ally. So I just wanted to say that, because it was on top of my mind.
Well, I just want to say, as y'all were talking, I was like, that's why these people, my friends, y'all. I just feel so proud. I can't even take credit for all of this, but I think also for people at home who are viewing, I hope this also encourages you to think about, when you are having these discussions, are you talking with people who are challenging you to hold many other truths, to dig deeper, and to decenter yourself, right? And something that I've loved so much is that each of you, while building off of what the other person have said, have also provided more ways for someone to understand and engage with this work. As we kind of transition to our next segment and then close, I'm like, dang, y'all, we've been talking a lot and this has been so good. I just want to sit here and keep talking. But what I did want to say was that, thinking about how many of us were very familiar with the story of Jerry Forney, why was this history obscured? And Warren, just want to share gratitude for you, because I forgot to mention, right, like when Letitia and I looked into the site, that yes, it is now a parking lot in the funk zone, so folks can hop around to different wineries, right? That erasure being really violent. But if I think of like healing justice and like demands that we put forth, right? Like, one of the demands was that Santa Barbara stop protecting all of these monuments to white supremacy while actively destroying Black history. And so we can talk more about what that demand was, and how we've organized to protect the first Black churches in Santa Barbara and others. But there's so many of these sites now that do not exist. And so how do we still teach ourselves, teach our children what's happening? And so as you all were talking, I was like, our children in Santa Barbara Unified School District, do they know the story of Jerry Forney? Who is teaching them that story? Where can they seek out that story? Should they know this story? Especially because we have every year this celebration of the mission. And we can talk about why people know that story and not the story of like Chumash uprising. So Indigenous folks who were like, yeah, y'all not gonna keep me here, separate me from my language, religion, spiritualities. Why is that not something we're learning alongside, this history, right? And so I guess with that, I'm hoping that we can talk to what does it look like to have Juneteenth as like, I guess I'm using Juneteenth as like, what does it look like to have a commitment to Black liberation in our local community? So I know you talked about supporting a Black and African American Cultural Resource Center. We talked about preserving some sites. I'm going to offer like I mentioned, that means actually integrating local Black history, especially those that demonstrate, wider like national themes. Because we know that while this was happening to Jerry in California, this was also happening to each of our ancestors wherever they were. So whether it was mine, who were in like Virginia and Tennessee and then found their way to Los Angeles, or Chiana yours, or Warren yours, like this was happening across the country. And so it's important for our students to understand how this directly impacts them wherever they are in this country. But I'm wondering perhaps if you all may have other ideas of what does Juneteenth look like? What does a Juneteenth mindset look like in Santa Barbara? Maybe even also like, are there places now that feel like they are a Juneteenth place? Could I say that? Yeah, like this is my Juneteenth place. This is where when I'm there, I am feeling this like spirit. I am feeling like the ancestors like, oh yeah, that's where you're supposed to be, that type of stuff. It might be like, honestly, perhaps we don't have those spaces and we should talk about that too. But yeah, just thinking about what does that look like locally?
I would jump in really quick. I think it's just so funny how whenever we have these conversations, how they all flow, and that's how I know it's like it's a good conversation because everything just kind of lines up. And I know it's a super cliche, and it's like something people say all the time, but knowledge is power. And I think that Juneteenth is literally a celebration of gaining knowledge of freedom. Like it literally is a celebration of getting that knowledge. And so when you talk about like, should children be taught about this? Yes, they should definitely know their history because that is a powerful thing. When people realize, like a lot of people think that Black folks started at slavery, that's where the history began. But even though we can't trace our ancestry, we know where we were taken from. And so we know what those civilizations were before this time period. And so just to think about if you can educate a child and let them know that, you were kings and queens out here. Like y'all were walking on gold streets and had like platinum cats that you guys are just playing with. You know what I mean? Like if you can give someone that kind of strength of like knowledge and sense of self and sense of family, that's so empowering. And so for me, what I love is that even though Juneteenth is a kind of big thing in the South, when I came here, it wasn't a big deal, but through the work that Healing Justice has done, I've seen that it's become more of and Juneteenth, Santa Barbara. I've noticed that there is more of a pride. Just the people that I'm talking to, people are very, very happy that they can celebrate with others. And I think as Black people, I can only speak for myself. We're social beings. We love being around each other. We love sharing, and we're very oral and we're very active. And so it's one thing to celebrate within myself this thing of Juneteenth, but it's a whole nother thing when I know I can look across the room and I don't have to say nothing. But we both at this cookout. We both got and we get it. You know what I mean? And so I think with the celebration here in Santa Barbara, what that does, it brings another joy. It gives people another reason to want to stay because it's already tough on a lot of people wanting to stay in Santa Barbara. And so when we're doing this, Juneteenth has become sort of this like, we might not be doing anything else, but I know on Juneteenth, I got a group of people that I can go to and we can all celebrate this same experience. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel too, like on the education piece, it is important for young Black kids to know where they come from beyond slavery, right? Like, just like what you were saying. And I also think it's like all of the kids, like kids from all different backgrounds and races need to know this too, because we have white kids being indoctrinated, around these ideas of what Black people are and what other folks are. And I think, like that history needs to be exposed to all different kinds of kids and young people who are going to be our next generation. Like everyone needs to understand that we are more than just this history that, we sort of were it happened to us, like the stuff that happened to us, we're so much more than that. And I think about my own kids who are not Black presenting, just like I'm not really Black presenting. And I think about what do I want them to understand about Blackness, not really having the same sort of connection to it that I may have had from my family. So I'm always thinking about those things, like how do we continue a different legacy of understanding and education for young people. And And I mean, yes, for me, it's like a no-brainer. Of course, kids in Santa Barbara should understand that history. Everyone should know that history. And like I said, history for Black folks has been disposed of by white people who have sort of taken control of what we're allowed to know about ourselves. And I think it's a beautiful thing to take back that power and take back that control and say, no, this is our history and we're going to be in control of how it's told and who writes it and how it's, distributed and provided to other people. So, I'm always curious about what acts of resistance can we engage in to continue doing that work to make sure that happens sustainably and for, in the long run. So yeah, that's sort of my take on that.
I'm thinking, so if you are not engaged already, we want to stress that you get involved and support ethnic studies now. We would suggest that you get involved and be engaged at those board meetings for Santa Barbara City College, for Santa Barbara Unified School District, for Goleta as well, because again, thinking about the many ways that we can show up and whose, I'm trying to use your wording, Athena, whose comfort we are prioritizing and who we need to make uncomfortable. Y'all need to show up at those meetings and make them people uncomfortable because they are making a whole bunch of decisions that impact our children, our youth, our communities. I mean, something I was even thinking as you were talking, Warren, and then I will hand it off to our non-Black allies is, are we even telling the full truth and the full stories of enslavement? So that looks like, are we talking about the Black people who loved each other through that shit? Are we talking about the Black people who saved bits of their spirituality and religion and words to create an entire language that Black folks share in the United States that you don't find anywhere else, right? Or I was listening to Kenya Barris because they were talking about adapting the book Underground Railroad for this TV show, and something he talked a lot about is we don't talk a lot about Black parenting during enslavement. We talk some about kinship, but we also know that Black men, as well as women, but specifically Black men, if you want to talk about, because we need to celebrate, especially Black fatherhood, we don't talk about the ways that they were raising, caring for, sometimes cooking for, because we know gender roles were different and have always been different amongst Black folks, Black children, Black grandchildren. So he was saying how important it was for him when making Underground Railroad to show images of Black men caring for collective children, and how we have to save this space, knowing that Black men have made themselves vulnerable. And because we refuse to see that vulnerability, right, it allows us, and I don't say us because I don't do this, I'll say allows harmful people to be less impacted when Black men are killed by police, when they are taken from their families, because we haven't wanted to engage with how much they have actually given to us, right? So even when we talk about enslavement, we're not talking about the full stories of how Black people survived through that, right? And I guess thinking about what Warren said too, the legacies that they continued of their ancestors. So whether they were Black folks who were royalty, or just Black folks who were midwives, or Black folks who were farmers, or Black folks who were scientists, all of those people were kidnapped too, put on plantations, but they were able to continue those skills and gifts, right? And then have poured into us. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our allies before we close out. But again, I'm just so grateful. Seriously, y'all, my brain is like pew, 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 pew. I feel like I'm getting so much smarter. I'm so excited. I'm like, I need to take notes, revisit all these books. So thank you. I just want to make sure I say that again. Thank you.
So I guess, Simone, I really want to uplift sort of that call in again to a lot of the white folks, especially white mothers, the Amy Coopers, about sort of what's happening in our schools right now. Again, ethnic studies and, critical race theory, that's the new talking point for all these like violent ass white folks. And they're literally calling in our K through 12 system, spewing all this hate about CRT, which we know CRT is not being taught in K through 12, although it should. But thinking about ethnic studies when done right as a framework that is borrowed from, that is derived from critical race theory and all of its intersectional concepts. I really want to come back quickly about this concept of joy as resistance, right? Anna G and I talk about this a lot, and I know we all talk about this as friends, but when we're really involved in this work and organizing, no matter what your role is, because again, emphasizing that we all have a role, we all have a gift, we all have a talent. Thinking about joy and thinking about the ways in which that we celebrate one another. Simone, when I found that photo from Escuelita of you and Zora, really thinking about like your baby shower, and La Escuelita, which was a freedom school that, Simone, Athena, myself, and a bunch of other folks sort of co-created, again, community-wide effort. Thinking about Gabrielle bringing an offering to plant okra in the Somos Semillas garden and really sharing that history with all these non-Black co-conspirators and indigenous folks that'll be planted right next to corn, right, to maize. And again, all that significance and all that love and all that solidarity just by like planting seeds. And the last thing I want to say, bringing it back to Santa Barbara and what's happening right now, I'm hearing the parking lot, right, that space, the erasure, the co-opting, the everything that has happened in that landmark. Thinking about the Lincoln School, speaking of a parking lot where it was the first school for Black and brown children. Black folks are still here. And there was a much larger, thriving Black community, especially on the east side of Santa Barbara, for a very long time before they got violently displaced and pushed out. So thinking about the Lincoln School, which was the first Black and brown school, and then it was acquired by the city of Santa Barbara to build affordable housing. And then it became a farmer's market. And when we think about liberation, we think about abolition, we think about all those things, right? We think about a real education, we think about housing, we think about food and food sovereignty. So I just want to name that as we in the city of Santa Barbara deny healing justice, the resources to build a Black and African American cultural resource center, we also intend to construct a monument to white supremacy in the form of an $80 million police station on that very site. So as people cheer, us tearing down monuments to white supremacy again in the South, or wherever, acting like we also do not participate in that, we have intentions in the city of Santa Barbara with our tax dollars to build a monument to white supremacy, where one of our ABR people, when they were showing this ridiculous, disgusting, huge building, which could be a beautiful apartment building for our people, right? The person said, oh, make sure those benches aren't sleeping size. So again, the violence of the ways in which we want to construct this monument to white supremacy, and also saying, make sure that like houseless people can't like rest or sleep on those benches in front. So I'll stop here, but yeah, thank you so much for this. I'm gonna be floating all day.
I just want to add something really quickly. It really isn't that meaningful, but I heard you say joy is resistance. I remembered yesterday I had a long day, took my kids to the beach. It was a fun day, but I was exhausted at the end of the day. And I laid in my bed and the first thought I had was, oh my gosh, rest is freedom. Like sleeping, rest is freedom. Like this is what freedom is to me right now. And just thinking about all the different things that embody freedom. Like when we think about freedom and liberation, all the different pieces of that, resistance, joy, rest, like all of those things have to work together to create an environment in which liberation can thrive and like freedom can thrive in ourselves and in our community. So I was just listening, oh yes, joy is freedom and also rest is freedom too.
Thank you, Chiani, for bringing that in. That's one of the things that I was going to name as well. This work is tiring, right? And exhausting, and Black people and other marginalized communities are dying because of how engaged they are in this work, and because it feels like there is no time to rest and there is no time to experience joy. So it is something that I try to bring into every space that I occupy, and just reminding us, even if it's a 10-minute nap, or even if it's not tuning into the board meeting one week because you need a freaking break, right? Like, it's okay, and you are allowed to do that. And if I become part of your circle, it will be something I will remind you of. That is another way that I practice resistance in this work. And so there's that piece. But thinking about the Santa Barbara component and that history component, honestly, like, a lot of the stuff that I know now, thanks to folks in this room and who aren't able to be here, I wouldn't have known had I not been connected with you all. And that makes me really sad. So it makes me think about the ways that this history could be some of that joyful piece, right? Thinking about the melanin art exhibit and how that brings joy to people, I hope, right? And how can that continue to be a way that we do this? It brings me back to thinking about Jerry Forney and the role that he was forced to play, right? Reimagining what, I guess, not reimagining, but like acknowledging the different roles that Black folks play in our society. You know, I've been doing a lot of research, not Santa Barbara specific, because as we've named, it's hard to find information for Santa Barbara, but a lot of like major inventions that we use on a daily basis were invented by Black folks, but their credit was stolen and it was given to other people like Thomas Edison. Google it, it's true. You know, so thinking about like the role that you take to educate yourself, especially as non-Black people, to remind our youth, especially about the rights of Black people and the contributions that Black people have made to our society, the ways that Black people have shown up for not just Black people, but for all of us. You know, it makes me think of a woman, I'm forgetting her name, I'll Google it and bring it back up, but who climbed the Statue of Liberty to protest families being separated together. Black people show up for us. We need to return the favor. All of our liberation is interconnected, and unless the most marginalized people in our communities are free, none of us will be, right? And it's kind of what we're talking about in this moment. It makes me think about the need for artists in all genres to be able to participate. It makes me think of movies that we see, TV shows that we see, and how it's either, you know, people in the stereotyped role about what we have come to accept as the only truth about Black folks, or it's about how they've made it out and how they've essentially come closer to whiteness, right? So I think it's important for us to redefine what Black success and Black futures look like, and understand that the measure shouldn't be whiteness. Like, white people have that down. Let Black people and other people in their communities show up in their success and in their joy and in their beauty, right? So yeah, that's coming up for me.
Well, I sort of think that would have been a more appropriate final statement than whatever I'm going to end up saying. But speaking to the history of Black people in Santa Barbara and the absence of spaces for true Black joy and rest in Santa Barbara, I think about how so many white people in SB do not really think about how that the white liberal and progressive idea of inclusion is actively harmful rather than just like not enough, you know? It's not like it falls short of justice and liberation, it's actually harmful. It's like they've put out this menu that is totally founded in, you know, white supremacy and capitalism, and they're like, you guys can add all the sides you want to the menu. Like, we're happy to take your sides. Also, if you don't want to add your own sides, we can create them for you. We'll just like figure out what they should look like. And it will be a really good balanced menu. So that anytime that Black people are saying like, well, we've actually got our own menu, they're like, oh my God, that is not inclusive, you know? That is not appropriate. You didn't do it the right way because we said we had a menu and you just had to apply for like what sides you wanted to add. And I kind of related to that, I also wanted to go back to the idea of discomfort, because there is a caveat to that where it's just, this thing keeps happening where you have white people who are like, oh, Black Lives Matter, I am totally here for you. What do you need? Just tell me, we can talk about it and I will be there. And then after a while, you see that there's this thing going on in their head where they're like, you know, I've actually done a lot of stuff for Black people, and it really made me so uncomfortable. And a lot of people don't like me now the way they did before. I feel like I've done so much. Where's my credit, you know? When is somebody gonna recognize that I am all about Black liberation? And it's like, no, that's not what I mean about feeling uncomfortable. Like, another way to look at it probably is just like, when are you giving Black people a break? You know, not like, when am I feeling uncomfortable? I feel like I, you know, said that wrong by making it about like you, the non-Black person. It's like, when am I giving Black people a break?
Who y'all? Well, again,
Hey Simone, can we
oh,
make sure that we do another one of these? Because that Thomas Edison thing, got my blood flowing. It's just like, you know,
Sorry,
he worked. I'm just like, he worked at a patent office. You know what I mean? And you tell people to do the right thing, copyright your ideas, and so you send it into this dude. Who in the world allows him to have over 1,000 patents? Like, what are we doing? Sorry. Anyway, I'm off. I'm muting. Bye.
I'm here for that conversation as well. But I also wanted to take a moment and name Patricia Okumu. And that is the woman who I was referring to, who climbed the Statue of Liberty. Thank you, Patricia.
so I want to say yes to all of these things. We have to do another one. I think in kind of talking about this is joyful, like being able to vision is joyful, to talk, to ask questions, to dig deeper. Hopefully for folks who are viewing, this has been stimulating and activating for you in some ways. Maybe it's made you a little bit uncomfortable, but I think like our panelists were suggesting, perhaps you need to sit in that space and think about why. And then also how we might show up considering we're like, oh, this caused me to think about some things, hold some different truths that I haven't been asked to before. So much gratitude to each of our panelists for your time, for your vulnerability, for your honesty, for your presence. I am going to wish us all a happy Juneteenth month, Pride Month, all of these wonderful, beautiful things that remind us that what we're fighting for is so incredibly worth it, and that we are all so deserving. So I am looking forward to the next conversation, but just sincerest gratitude. So with that, everyone, bye. So get some rest, like Chiani said, and then do the work. So thank you and bye-bye.